Hello, everyone, and welcome to the second feature presentation of Wakelet Community Week 2022. So the subject of this presentation is one that is both very timely and very, very close to the hearts of everyone at Wakelet and everybody in the community as well. Because in recent years, there's been a profound increase in the number of teachers leaving the education profession. And it's something that we see almost every week here at Wakelet. Teachers who, for whatever reason, have had enough of the situations that they're finding themselves in and instead choose to move on to another profession. So this is a problem, right? And it isn't going to just go away. And the Wakelet team ourselves, we've had some really passionate debates between ourselves as to why this is happening and why now. And all of us tend to come up with different reasons. So today is an incredible opportunity for us all because we get to unpack some of the issues and explore the real reasons behind the Educator Exodus and hopefully discover some solutions and discover ways how we can stop it. So I'm so proud today to introduce Michele Hill to join me for this much needed discussion. Michele is the co-author of the book Fired Up Teachership, and it's a book which helps teachers stay motivated and resilient during these really strange times we find ourselves in. And it's a book which inspired many teachers across the world to gain new perspective and feel empowered in their roles as educators. And she is the perfect person to speak about this issue. As always, this is a discussion. And we want to, use this as a platform and an opportunity to empower you as a community to leave your thoughts and your suggestions and your ideas and your grievances in the chat box, because I'm sure they'll inspire some questions later in the show. So without further ado, I would love to bring to the stage Michele. Welcome, Michele. Hey, how's it going?
Hi, everybody. Coming to you live from New Jersey, Long Beach Island, New Jersey.
It's so good to see you. And I'm really excited about this session because I think that, and we just spoke about this earlier, I think that this is a subject which so many people are talking about and it's on everybody's lips, but I think that very few people feel that empowered to really have a raw, open, honest discussion about why this is happening. And I think this is a really good forum for that. So Michele, why don't you let the folks at home know a little bit about yourself and kind of what you do?
Oh, okay. So I am a veteran educator for over 35 years. The last 4 I have spent as a director of admissions and strategic marketing for a countywide vocational school. Prior to that, I was in the classroom and absolutely loved teaching. I've been inspired to step out of the box a little, and in my new role, I was able to support teachers differently. So I had a different viewpoint as opposed to just being a teacher. I could then see from other people what it is that they were grappling with in terms of education. So that really came, full circle when I was approached to write a book, and I'll just a shameless plug here, with Dr. Frank Gronetsky, who it was just really fabulous and said, let's do something together in terms of what you're passionate about. And what I'm passionate about is keeping teachers fired up. I'm passionate about keeping teachers wanting to stay, not necessarily in the classroom, but in education and do really terrific work. So that was the precipice of, the reason that we wrote the book. And one of the things that we said early in our book is that we're standing on the precipice of a crisis. Mm-hmm. And that crisis is a national, if not global, teacher shortage. Yes. So this is a conversation that I'm really excited to have today, but I know that it is a more serious conversation. I'll try to bring as many positive vibes to it because I think we can. I think that there are answers to this, but we do have to unpack it. There's a lot going on there. So thank you for having me today. Super excited.
Oh, no, the honor is all ours. I promise you that. This is something which we, like I said, we've wanted to speak about before. And it was just kind of serendipity, I think, that led us to the point where, we met. And, this is the perfect opportunity, I think, on the global stage. I think you're right in that it is national in the sense that it does seem to be affecting the American states disproportionately in terms of the shortage that's happening there. But as always, things that usually start in the US do tend to creep into Europe and then the rest of the world. And we at Wakelet have an extremely global community. We have people from all 4 corners of the globe joining us today to watch this. And I think that, there's pressures and there's situations and issues which teachers, regardless of where they are are facing. So I think that today it'll be important to kind of make that distinction and say, this isn't just the usual sort of burnout. This isn't just the usual disenchantment with people's professions. There's something more serious going on here. There's something much deeper than that. So what is the sort of current state of education when it comes to the numbers, right? What's going on there? Like, where are we at right now?
Well, the last report that I read recently said that we are going to have a shortfall of over 1 million teachers and administrators, over a quarter of the entire workforce. That is pretty recent, and states are grappling with this massive teacher and educator, and I want to extend it out to educator shortage, because it's not just teachers in the classroom, it's the support personnel, it's the administrators in a building. We're seeing it from all angles in education. People just are not finding education to be the career pathway of choice any longer. And there's a lot of reasons for that, and we'll talk about those. But we are in a crisis at this time. It is on the lips of everyone. Although I don't think that there's a concerted effort by all of the stakeholders that needs to happen to really tackle this head on, this massive teacher shortage.
Yeah, I think crisis is definitely the right word. We noticed it here in the office. I'd say that the kind of whisperings of it started around 18 months ago. And then I think the pressures during the pandemic had a really important part to play in it. By the way, when I say things, I'm coming from a place of complete ignorance, right? And I have a tendency to say things quite confidently, and they could be completely wrong. So when I just want to have a disclaimer, like I'm just sharing what my interpretation is. I think that what happened during the pandemic is, teachers really went above and beyond to serve the needs of their students and their communities. And I think that at the time, although there was a sense of like, thanks, like this is amazing, I think that it put the role of teachers in perspective for themselves, where they're like, actually, we are doing a really important job. And now that the kids are stuck at home and the parents have to deal with them, maybe this will be a good turning point for us. Maybe that empathy, that much needed empathy, will return to the scene where the parents understand what they're dealing with. And then if you have a couple of kids at home, you multiply that by 30, and then you can, get a little bit of a hint as to what the stresses are of a teacher. But do you think that the pandemic played any role in this at all?
Yeah, so just kind of jumping off your point there, which was really great. There was gratitude for teachers in the very beginning when parents were at home with their children and they were trying to tackle the in-home learning. All of a sudden, everywhere on all social media, you were seeing, thanks to these teachers, they're heroes. It's amazing what they do. I couldn't do this every day. And then it shifted yet again when it was time for schools to open up, and not all schools did, and they opened up, on sporadic schedules. All of a sudden, teachers became villains again. And so that was the negative narrative that was happening. And I get the frustration. As a parent, I absolutely get the frustration. People look to, at least in the United States, to schools as being their childcare. So, the loss of learning was important to them, but more than anything was the fact that they were losing the childcare that they had become very dependent upon. So that changed the narrative as well. So I think that the pandemic really shone a light on a lot of different things. But I think for teachers, they were now asked to wear many hats. They were teaching virtually. They were teaching in person. They were being IT tech support people because their kids' cameras didn't work and their devices didn't work. They were being social and emotional counselors. There were so many roles, and I think it just exhausted so many educators. And those that were standing on that line of, I could possibly retire, or there might be something else out there for me, some of them took the leap and did that. So yeah, the pandemic definitely, I think, really, exacerbated the issues that we have surrounding education.
Yeah, and I'd love to hear from the audience as well in the comments box. If you felt like your perception of your profession changed during the pandemic for better or worse, please share that perspective and let us know. Michele, why is this happening? Why is it? Why is it? Like, if you could summarize it in a couple of points, why is it that we're
Yeah.
experiencing this shortage?
So I personally think that we have, I call it a three-legged stool, and if one of the legs gets, gets broken, it becomes shaky. If two of the legs get broken, it's really unsustainable. We actually have three shaky legs right now in education. We have teacher attrition. And that is really probably the most problematic is that new teachers, 50% of new teachers coming into education, not, I would say young, but they're not all young. They're people that are doing it as a second career. They leave within 5 years, 50% of them.
Wow.
So that's a very staggering statistic. So we have to look at why are we not retaining these teachers who came in so passionate about what they wanted to do as a career choice and wanting to leave within the first 5 years. The second one is we are not getting the amount of students to enter into college, university to study education as a major. And there's a lot of reasons for that. That we are seeing a steep decline in the amount of students who want to be teachers. And then the third is I call it early retirement. It's teachers who probably would stay another 10 years. They have the energy to do it, but they are finding it to be exhausting, or they're disheartened by the system. So the three of those together are creating a massive teacher shortage. And any one of those would make our stool shaky. However, we have all three going on. And so that really makes us, in a crisis mode where I'm not sure that we can handle all three at the same time, but we have to. We have to handle each of those individually, collectively as well.
It's a bit of a perfect storm then, it seems.
It is.
And as I imagined, it's not just the one issue that is causing this. I don't think that one issue could cause this. I think it's a sort of amalgamation of lots of different issues, which is causing this. So I think that already I'm interested, and already I feel like I've learned a lot more, because I think the usual things which people talk about when they're talking about this is things like stress and burnout and pressure and those kind of things. But I think that there has to be a deeper element to this, and I think that those reasons which you just said there, although they may not be as emotionally powerful in terms of reasons, they're logical. They're hearing that statistic that new teachers in the profession, they last 5 years. I mean, that's a crazy amount of turnover.
Yeah. So they lose 50% within the first 5 years of someone's teaching career. That means, you enter in a group of 20 new teachers within the first 5 years, 10 of them will be gone.
Wow.
And that is a staggering statistic. So we have to look at what we can do to support them in ways that will make them want to stay. There's a lot of things that we can do. And that's the one thing that I want everybody to leave this session knowing, that there are things that we can do. Some of it's within our control individually. Some of it's within our control collectively as a unified group of educators or outreach to politicians. There's definitely things that we can do to change this so that we can inspire and retain great quality teachers.
And why do you think this is happening now? What's changed in recent years that is causing this shortage?
There's a number of things that have changed. I would say probably the one thing that we really have a lot of control over is the public narrative of what teachers are, what they do every day. There was, and I hope I don't upset anybody when I say this. This is just living as an educator. I can remember when it shifted in this country to where teachers became more villainous than they were to be heroes, as they had been thought of in years past. And there was a concerted effort to make them villains, because they are state employees, public employees, and they're being paid with public funds. And so there's the deal with pensions and healthcare. And when the entire country suffered, and probably globally had similar issues of economic downturns, and they were looking at ways to cut costs. And most other private sectors were looking at healthcare as being one of the huge issues, and pensions being a huge issue. They started looking at teachers and created a narrative that teachers were greedy and they only wanted to be there for the pension and for the healthcare. And when that happened, and as I said, I think it was on purpose. I think it was a narrative that they wanted out there so that they could use that opportunity to cut back on certain things, benefits. When they did that, they also created a negative narrative of the individual teacher. And so then people, when they would find out you were a teacher, they'd be like, oh, and there was no longer, wow, that's amazing, that, what you shape young minds. It was looked at negatively. So that is the number one thing that I think that I would really love to see all of the politicians, all of the people, stakeholders that can, to change the narrative back to understanding that most teachers come to this profession and most educators come into this profession as altruistic people who want to change the world one student at a time. And if people believe that, and really, truly, honestly looked at it and said, yep, most of them are good and most of them do the right thing and most of them are there for the right reasons. I think that just changing the narrative would really help in terms of recruiting young educators or people at the university level to come into education. So that's one of the things that I think is really has really changed, that caused a lot of people to not want to go into education. The other thing is, as we said, there's, the healthcare benefits, the pension, those have been curtailed significantly. And so those two things now, when teachers are paying, I was paying $7,000 a year for my healthcare benefits. And that's more than some people in the private sector pay. So I was no longer receiving that benefit. That was like that was a pay cut. So those things I think did have an effect on the teacher shortage, or people wanting to come into the profession. But the other things are state testing, mandated testing. We are being tested constantly. They broke up, what would have been, maybe 2 weeks of testing, and now they test for every individual subject. And so we spend so much time a year in test prep and test administration, and teachers don't want to teach to the test. So that's another big thing that teachers are seeing as a downfall in terms of their profession, and maybe not wanting to stay in it because of having to jump through all the hoops in terms of state testing. The autonomy for teachers has been lost. A lot of things are now very scripted in terms of what you teach. You have to be on the same page as somebody else in your department, so you don't have a lot of autonomy. And a lot of teachers are feeling that they've lost the joy of what they do. Adding all the different layers that they would do to make it joyful learning has been really curtailed. So that's, I would say, another thing that has changed. And then one of the other things is licensure. It's become very difficult in some states to get your teacher's license. They have raised the test scores that people coming into the profession need for their mandated test. They have made additional courses that teachers needed to participate in and successfully complete. So all of the levels of licensure has also added to the difficulty in getting more candidates approved to be teachers. All of those things have affected education in the last 20 years.
Yeah, I mean, gosh, that's a lot of information to take in, I think, especially for me who, I again, like I said, I don't know much about this issue, but one of the things that struck me, which I've only just realized now, is that it's a double-edged sword. It's like there's a dual problem going on. It's not just this idea of like mass resignations. It's also the shortage in teachers. Just the prospect of becoming a teacher is not as attractive as it once was. And I think that you're right. Like, I think that when you take away those benefits and when you make, it's nuts to me that a profession that is so important as teaching is not held up as this golden opportunity for people, and doesn't have the benefits, and doesn't have a competitive pay, and is constantly in the spotlight, and that has all these pressures from society, from parents, from administrators, from superintendents, from principals, from all over the place. There's a lot of pressure, and I guess
Absolutely.
it feels like educators just want to sort of shut the door and teach, and things get in the way of that, and that's been becoming more and more common with friends of mine who are educators in the community. The things which they complain about, and the things that when they air their grievances and when they talk to me, they're things which I never thought would be an issue that a teacher would have to face. It's like, I don't remember teachers when I was younger having to deal with the same things. And the irony of that is that I believe fully, like wholly, that the quality of education has increased so much more than it has then, with the platforms, with more of an emphasis on diversity and culture and things like that, and equity. The quality of the education has increased so much, and yet teachers are at a point where they're being appreciated worse than they ever have before. Yeah. So it's sad, and obviously we are going to try and get to some of the solutions hopefully later on down the line, but like I said, everybody in the chat, I think I've been reading the comments as we go along, and it's been amazing, reading them and understanding a little bit more into what you're experiencing. So obviously you did mention as well the public perception. Now here in the UK, there aren't as many, I think, technical reasons for teachers, for people not to get into education. Like healthcare is we have a national healthcare system. Yeah. It's universal, so we don't have to worry too much about that. I think that pay has always been an issue for teachers, and I know that we're going to get into that later on. But yeah. One of the things which I think the UK doesn't have as much, and I think that Europe doesn't have as much, is the sort of, how can I call it, the politicization or something yeah. of education as the US has. Why do you think that is? Why do you think that teachers are facing that? Why do they have to face politics in the classroom when it comes to teaching?
It's so funny because I never thought that going into education was going to be politicized and polarized. I never thought that. But it's amazing how much control people who are non-educators have over the education system. So they're making decisions for educators and for students and for schools without having the ins and outs of what it takes to be successful. And so I would say to politicians that you really need to understand fully what the challenges are for educators before you create laws and rules that are governing them. I mean, we have, and again, I hope I'm speaking freely, so I hope I don't upset anybody, but we have book banning that is happening all over this country, and politicians that are advocating for the book banning, but some of the politicians may not have ever read the book. They don't understand why it's important in teaching in a curriculum or a lesson in a school. And they're responding to community and parent backlash that may have different viewpoints than what the school has in terms of teachings. So those things, it's amazing that it is so politicized and polarized, but it is happening. I don't know if that happens globally all over the world, but right now we're in a different crisis in the United States of having extreme right and left thought processes with very little conversation that's coming to the middle ground and taking into account that we have to be reasonable. It's very polarized. So that is trickling down into education. Should it be? No, it should not. But it is. It absolutely is. So every school district has a school board. Depending on how that school board leads, they can create different rules, regulations for the school that may be polarized. And we should be devoid of that in education, but we're not, unfortunately.
It's a really difficult position to be in, I think, when you are because I think educators in general are really, really passionate. And I think that people do not get into education for financial gain. Like you said, there's more of an altruistic viewpoint, I think. And most of the educators that we meet, the commitment that they have to their students is just unbelievable. I can't imagine anything more frustrating than just trying to do your job to the best of your abilities and being boots on the ground, being in the classroom and dealing with that on a daily basis, and yet having to sort of bow to the demands of a group of people that are making key decisions on your behalf that you don't have a say in. And I think that you highlighted a really important part there, which is that the irony of it is that teachers actually have very little influence in the trajectory of their profession and the curriculum and the system in general. And I think that that needs to change. I think that you have to bring teachers into the discussion more and ask them questions. And it just feels like, again, when we talk about the politicization of it, it's like when you start making decisions on behalf of other people, then you're in pretty scary ground. And it comes as no surprise when you have people leaving because of that. So let's kind of turn our attention then to a more positive sort of direction. What can be done immediately? What kind of practical steps can we take to sort of immediately start filling in that shortage?
Yeah, so I do think, and then I want to say that very clearly, there are some answers that we have here. And if you visit my website that I know we're going to put in the chat, there's a tab that talks about strategies and resources, and they're not all mine. So it's a culmination of things that I've seen out there that I think were great ideas and kind of put them in one place. But I think we can do a lot of things right now. And the very first thing I talked about is changing the public narrative. So I've been reaching out on Twitter to, our secretary, Cardona, to really highlight that we need to do something collectively, all stakeholders, school board members, parents, teachers, educators, administrators, unions, NJEA, AFT, all of the teachers unions. Those all can come together and craft a change in the public narrative. So highlighting teachers, I think, would be phenomenal. Like, when we highlight all of these superstar sports people, that's awesome. But let's do that for teachers. Let's do banners of teachers, of what they've done. Let's make it commercials so that people see the reality of what teachers do, educators, and I say teachers, but educators do on an everyday basis. Because as I said before, I do believe that teachers, by and large, are some of the most altruistic people on the face of the earth. We have obviously nurses and doctors, we have teachers, we have clergy, we have police officers. I think that there are people that really want to help. We're serving the public. So I want people to see it. I want them to feel it. And I want them to know that we are not the enemy as educators. We are going to work every day, loving your children and wanting the best for them, and trust us that we are doing that. Don't look for the negative narrative. So I think that would help a lot if we could start with a collective, unified voice in changing the narrative. And if there are people here who are listening, who have connections to high-level politicians or people in the, the unions, let's get on that page together. Let's do that together. So that's the number one issue that I think would really start to change. If we saw people holding up and celebrating teachers the way they do other professions, I think you would see a resurgence of people wanting to become a teacher. Think back to when you were little and you were 5 and 6 years old, and people say, what do you want to do when you grow up? And most kids were like, well, I want to be a fireman, and I want to be a police officer, and I want to be a teacher. And those are all professions that we're villainizing. So, what do the kids say today? I want to be a stockbroker? Maybe. But I think we need to change that narrative and bring that back. That's the very first thing I would probably do. The second thing I would talk about is lobbying for less standardized testing. And that would be, at your local level, your state level, and then the national level. Write to as many politicians as you can. Get your collective group of educators to sign petitions and start lobbying and be willing to sit on panels as to why it is too excessive. Because I think that teaching to the test and the loss of autonomy for teachers has really been one of the struggle points. I would say that that's probably one of the second ones I would do. I would also think about multiple pathways to getting certified to be an educator. So we do have that in some areas. I don't know how cumbersome it is, but in New Jersey, it's pretty cumbersome. They don't just have their degree, they have to take classes, and then they have to do student teaching. And I'm not an advocate for streamlining it so that they're not prepared. So don't misunderstand that. I definitely want qualified people who are ready to face the challenges of education. But I think that we could streamline some of the process in ways that would allow them a little bit more time to be prepared in the classroom setting so that they can have a mentor available to them. While we're speaking about mentors, huge. We need mentors. We don't just need somebody in a school building who says, I'll do it because I make $500, or a teacher that's been tapped by an administrator like nobody else wants to do it, you have to do it. We need passionate mentors who say, I'm looking at training and helping assist this new teacher become the best that they can be, so that as a group collectively, we're better together. So having strong mentorships at the local level in your school, developing a good PLN, professional learning network, and then even at the state level, and this is something I've trying to have a conversation about in New Jersey, is why at the state level do we not have that possible of a virtual mentorship where that they would pay for every new teacher? You would be able to have 50 hours of mentorship where you could sign up with somebody who's state approved, and you can jump on a Zoom call and say, I'm going to be observed tomorrow. I'm so nervous. What do you think I should do? Like those conversations, because sometimes people don't have great mentors in their building. Sometimes they don't feel comfortable with showing weakness to people in their building, but they may be able to extend it out there. So a great mentorship program at the local level, but also at the state level would be awesome. Creating a homegrown pipeline of education, that means starting from when they're young, fourth and fifth graders. I want to be a teacher. Well, what does that look like? And how can we get them actively interested? And how can we keep them their interest along the way until they graduate so that they could possibly do that? And then do we do any scholarships in terms of, students who are wishing to go on to education? I know some states right now are in such a bind that they are giving loan forgiveness to people who are studying education if they stay in for 5 years. So that seems to be like that magic number. If they stay past 5 years, they get a lot of loan forgiveness, but also scholarships that would help pay the way, or even, the possibility that there is a tuition break or no tuition for people going into education. So those are things that they could do. The other thing is the financial incentives. Are our salaries competitive enough? And that is huge. These kids today, and I say kids because they're younger than I am for the most part, most people my age are not starting a career, they are going into education with debt. And the salaries that they are making is not paying for their debt and the ability to earn a living that they could, support themselves. So raising teachers' salaries, making sure like that healthcare contribution, it went completely in New Jersey to another side where it got lopsided, where we were paying a significant amount. So bringing that back in line with maybe the private sector. We talked about tuition reimbursement and forgiveness, those kinds of things. Some places like Las Vegas, they're offering housing credits because it's so expensive in Las Vegas and California and other places that are expensive to live. So they're offering housing benefits. So there's a lot of financial things that I think we could do that will bring people back into the education sphere as well.
Well, that's hopeful, at least, that there are practical steps that we can take, and that, you've taken the time to identify those problems. And, in order for us to move forward and come up with solutions, we have to identify why these things are happening in the first place. So it's good that there are at least steps that people can, well, not people, but that we as a society must take in order to kind of prevent this from happening. I think I got two different things. Oh, sorry, bear with me one moment. Sorry, I think the stream got cuts up there. Am I back on? Can you still hear
Yeah,
me?
I can hear
Okay,
you.
great. Okay, good. So yeah, what I was saying was that there are a few different things which I picked up from that. First of all, is like you need good marketing, right? Like the teaching profession has to have more brand awareness and more marketing to it. I think that there are always you find commercials and things of like, you know, those who can teach and that kind of thing. We have them in the UK as well. But I think that for a profession which is the perception of it is struggling, I think we need to double down on that. And like you said, you know, show people role models, show people how amazing it can be and how satisfying it can be being a teacher. But then that leads me to another issue, which is that what you said is that if we're moving towards standardized teaching, and if that's like always on the cards, then it's impossible, I guess, to kind of get that romance of teaching, that magic, you know, that kind of doing it your own way and injecting your own sort of character and your own personality in your teaching. I remember when I was growing up, you know, we had teachers with lots of different personalities, and I'm sure that we still have that now. But I think that the moment that you try and dampen that and you know, force something like standardized testing, you're going to lose so many memorable learning experiences, because as people have said in the chat, it's like factory line teaching. It's like everyone has the
Yeah.
exact same goal, and it's going to be really difficult to get those unique, memorable moments for the students. So yes, that's what I want to say about that. And then obviously the last thing which you mentioned, which is pay. This is something which like we've spoken about multiple times, and it's something which I think makes people uncomfortable when you do speak about it, but it has to be, you have to talk about it. You have to, you know, you can't expect people to continue to do not only a job which is like thankless, but a really difficult job. Like the amount of hats that teachers are wearing, you know, the amount of lives that they have to influence and the amount of problems that they have to field every single day. And we're not talking about problems as in like paperwork. We're talking about little human beings. Like you have so much responsibility over their development. And it's like, it's sad that we as society and parents are entrusting people to help develop our kids and our offspring, and yet we're not willing to campaign to teach to you know, pay them more. It's a very odd situation when you dissect it like how we're doing. It doesn't make sense. How do you think we can support educators to help them to stay in the profession? So in the community, for example, we have some like, you know, the community is made up of educators, and we hear their struggles, and you know, a lot of them are friends with the Wakelet team, and we get to hear some really interesting things, really shocking things and surprising things about the profession, and yet they still continue to do it. You know, there are still people left, there are still people holding the fort and holding it down. If we lose those, then we're kind of done for, right? So what do we
Yeah.
do to help people like that stay in the profession that they love so much?
Well, I think too, we have to remember there gets to a point for most educators, if they're living in a state where there is a pension, where they're looking at their career saying, I have to stay to get my pension. And that's a good thing, and it's a bad thing. It's a bad thing because it retains some teachers that probably shouldn't be in the classroom, that really would like to get out of the classroom. But it's a good thing in that if they stay long enough to get over the hump, maybe they've gotten to a hump where they just are, you know, have lost a little bit of their joy. If they get over that hump, that they can re-spark themselves and stay and re-energize themselves and recommit to what they're doing. And I've seen that happen over and over again. Life throws a lot at you. Most of the time, educators, by and large, are women who also are moms. And so during those tough years with their children, they kind of get into a lull because they're exhausted. They're trying to be mom, they're trying to be teacher. And so it's really difficult. And then once their children get to be a certain age where they're more independent, I've seen teachers rediscover their passion and light that spark again. So having a pension that is tied to it sometimes is a good thing, because it keeps them in long enough for them to rediscover it. So I would definitely support some type of financial, you know, pension or 401k style that rewards people for being there. I think that is an integral part of it. And the benefits, obviously, the healthcare benefits. People stay in jobs that are even low paying for benefits, because it's very difficult. So bringing the cost of the healthcare benefits in line, I think would help to retain some teachers. But those two things are administrative tasks. It could certainly do that. What I'm going to talk about right now is how can we support the day-to-day operations of an educator so that they feel supported and a sense of belonging in their school. A lot of this we do cover in the book Fired Up Teachership, and I hope that that if you have new teachers in your building, particularly new teachers or people that have kind of lost their spark a little bit, that you invest in getting a couple of copies and share them amongst your staff, because it is the tried and true things that Frank and I have encountered over the years in education, and it's what keeps us both still very passionate about education. So the one thing that I would talk about, and hopefully there's some administrators on in this session today, is your school culture is paramount. It is absolutely, bar none, the one thing that you have so much control over, and the difference that makes your school unique and a place where people want to be and want to stay. So working on your school culture and starting with, even a anonymous survey so that people can give you honest feedback about what's working, what's not working in your school would be a great place to start. But then when you get that information, what do you do with it? So the things that aren't working, how can you streamline them so that they work better? Or how can you omit something or take something off the teacher's plate? How can you recognize, reward, and celebrate your students and staff so that people feel valued? The number one thing that I have talked to with so many educators is that they don't feel valued and they don't feel seen. If you could change that one thing in your school, you are likely to have a school culture where people are excited to be there and want to be part of your team. So I would say that is, for me, that is where I would start looking at the school. Sure, there are going to be things that are out of the control of the teachers, out of control of the administrators. They're, from on high down, they come down and you have to do them. But when you have a team that works together, that want to be together, that people enjoy being around one another, you generally will have people to stay in your school building. So that would be the first thing I would talk about. The other thing is, let's talk teacher observations. Let's not make them punitive. Let's make them support. The educators going in, the administrators going to a classroom, it shouldn't be a gotcha. It shouldn't be the teachers are like so nervous because you just walked into the room. It should be, oh, here's Mr. Smith and he's here, and put him in the lesson and let him feel the magic of what's going on. When you support your teachers as an administrator, they see you as a colleague and a resource. And so they're more likely to go to you with concerns that they have, legitimate concerns they have, or challenges that they are dealing with. And by you helping them with, let's say, classroom management, classroom leadership, with you helping them, that might be enough to make them have joy in what they do every day, that they want to stay in the building. So that would be, the second thing I would talk about. Strong mentorship, we talked about pretty much at length. It's so key to keeping your young staff, but it's also key to keeping, young administrators or non-veteran administrators. Often it's crazy, but as a veteran teacher, I've been able to mentor some of the young administrators on their job because I've seen so many cycles through my lifetime that I've been able to give them a heads up on things that would make their job easier, or how they can support teachers and give them the perspective from a teacher voice. So mentorships can go both ways that way. We talked about, promoting education or pay for different things, and promoting pay for additional education. I know some people are against that, saying, people got a doctorate degree and they make so much more money. But anytime we get teachers to go back into a classroom and invest in learning is a good thing. So whether it's a degree or just online learning, to put more things in their toolbox, I think is awesome. The more a teacher knows, the more educated and relevant they are to what's going on in the world today, technology, the better equipped they feel, the more likely they are to want to stay. We have a lot of teachers who are leaving early because of the technology infusion that happened with the pandemic, and they're like, I can't do this. I can't do, computers. But investing in making sure that all the teachers are meeting them where they are and then taking them to where they need to be so that they feel confident is likely to, sway some of the teachers to say, I can do this, I can hang, and then they stay longer because they feel like they can accomplish that. I'm a big one on seeking feedback. I think that 3-4 times a year, you should do some ways to seek feedback from your staff. And the school board should be doing it from the district administrators, but getting really good feedback, whether it is quantitative, qualitative, a mix of both, whether it's individual, whether it's through a survey, a suggestion box, seek feedback. You cannot remedy things that you are unaware of. And I always remind people that I make it anonymous because people, they will say more if it's anonymous, if they are not fearing any retribution or retaliation of any sort, that you might put them in a different class, or you might do different things to them. So teachers have that in the back of their mind. I would say that try to seek it as anonymous as possible. And then we talked about pay increases. And I think that every school district right now should be looking at not just minimum salaries, but how are we across the board and across the guide compensating teachers. So you can't just attract new teachers in and say, I'm going to give them $70,000 a year, but then you have people who've been there for 15 years making $70,000 a year. They're going to get ticked off. They're not going to want to stay because they don't feel valued. They don't feel appreciated. So across the board, how are we going to levy pay increases so that it is fair to everyone who's in education right now? So those are the things that I think that we really could do right now.
Yeah, I think those are all really good. And judging from the comments, I think that you've inspired you've inspired lots of people agreeing with you. I wanted to touch a little bit on when you mentioned about administrators and decision makers and that. And I think that it's quite a popular idea to have administrators actually teach classes and be very involved, because that was one of the questions which I actually wrote down to ask you. Do you think that administrators and key people who are making decisions, are they completely out of touch with the actual boots on the ground experience of educators? And is that what's leading to the conflict in culture? And does that make it really difficult to build a culture when you don't have people aligned and you don't have people who are spending time in the classroom, understanding what the educators are going through? And I'd also love for everybody in the comments as well to answer this question, because I'd love to hear your thoughts. Do you think there's too much meddling but not enough empathy, perhaps?
So first I want to say I've been reading some of the comments when I put my glasses on, because it's hard for me to see that, but some of the comments are really terrific, and thank you all for participating. I love seeing those comments. And administrators, so here's the funny thing. The first 5 years that an administrator is out of the classroom, they have recollection of what it was like to be in the classroom. The further away they become from being in the classroom, the more just out of touch they get with what the challenges are, because life changes. And teaching in a pandemic is very different than them teaching 7 years ago when we didn't have a pandemic. So to get a real perspective, yeah, being in the classroom would be awesome. I think some administrators do it better than others. It depends on their role, and it also depends on the size of the district of whether they can do it. I had a great idea that wrote an article with ASCD, my former administrator, and I was a teacher in the classroom. He was a principal, and we came up with something called Speed PD, and we cycled teachers through a 5 to 7 minute workshop. And that was really valuable. And we had administrators and teachers be the facilitators of the workshop. So that was a great opportunity for the administrators to get back in. But then we came up with another idea, which was getting your administrators back into the classroom. And they, so it was, one of those things where I wanted our administrators to know what it was like to be in the classroom again. And I said, well, here's an idea. A lot of staff say you don't know what it's like because you haven't been in a classroom in a really long time. What do you think about rolling up your sleeves and all the administrators rolling up their sleeves and getting back in and team teaching a class with one of the staff members? So the staff members could elect one or more administrators to participate, and they would choose a lesson, and it was a collective planning period where the administrator and the teacher had to come together, plan every aspect of the lesson. I said, if you're going to mandate that we have what I called a bell ringer or an anticipatory set, then you're going to plan that. And so they would have to plan that. They would have to turnkey the facilitation of the lesson and then summarize. It was really a wonderful experience, and our staff took advantage of it. What it did was it gave the teachers a trust with this educator, this administrator, that you know what I'm doing and you feel what I'm doing and this is what it's like. So there was more trust built there. But it also gave the administrators that firsthand experience of jumping back in and making sure that they took attendance and they had an objective on the board and they had the anticipatory set. And at the end of 42 minutes, they were like, wow. So that was really great. But yeah, I think anytime we can get administrators back in, I know there are some school districts that actually promote that their administrators teach one class every day, and I think that's brilliant. I think that it keeps them very sure-footed and well-grounded in what the challenges are for teaching. So I would support any of those ideas.
So kind of like a bring it administrator to work day.
Yes.
Yeah. No, I think that would. I mean, just looking. Obviously, I'm not a teacher, but at Wakelet there's different departments, and I think that the toughest thing to do is empathize with other people's workloads and empathize with the struggles that other people have across different departments, especially when it's a completely different discipline. So, for us to understand a little bit more about what the development team are doing, for example, we'd have to shadow them. We'd have to actually look and understand, like, oh my God, this is a huge problem that they're trying to solve here. And it requires so much, mental gymnastics and thought processes and hard work to get done. And you can only do that when you witness it. Otherwise, you're just looking at the end result. And that's not the most efficient way to become empathetic. So it looks like that idea was very, very popular based on the thoughts in the comments. So this last question then before we, it's the second to last question before we wrap up, but I think it's a very interesting one. And at this point, we don't have to, but I would love to know if anybody in the chat has considered quitting in let's say the last 12 months, even just the thought, because this next question is, what would you tell educators who are considering that? If you have an educator who is sort of on their last legs and they're looking around and they're frustrated and, as Erica said, you're feeling claustrophobic, you're feeling like you cannot practice the best skills that you have, you're finding that your students are lacking focus because you are demotivated, because the things that you want to do and the things that you want to teach are sort of being constantly looked at, and what is it? What would you suggest to teachers who are feeling that way, who are considering leaving?
So I have two daughters that are both educators. One is in her 6th year of education. The other one is in her 2nd year. So she's a pandemic teacher. She's only taught during the pandemic. And both of them have really expressed disappointment, exhaustion, overwhelmed with what's being asked of them. And the very first thing I say to them is, hang on, help is coming. I do believe that this crisis that we're in right now is going to force things to become more teacher friendly. I think that if we continue on the path that we're on, where we're degrading teachers and education as a whole, we are going to suffer a crisis of, a proportion that we are not prepared for. Where are we going to put all of these students? How are we going to educate them? So I definitely know that help is coming, because it is on the lips of everybody, as you've mentioned. Now, what I'd like to see is that those stakeholders come together and do a unified, concerted effort in terms of helping. And I think that putting great minds together would only benefit and kind of really expedite the changes that are necessary. So I definitely think if we have people who have an ear of someone, like our Secretary of Education, our local politicians, that they can start to come together and say, hey, we need to put together a panel of all different stakeholders and see how we can start to not avert the crisis, but minimize the damage of the crisis that we have right now. So hang on, help is coming. That's what I would say. We get into a situation in education where we've done what we've always done. And so sometimes change is good. And so I would recommend to a teacher that if you're really struggling in your particular subject area and you've taught fourth grade for the past 15 years, and I know it's easier because you know the content, you know what's expected, but you also might be drowning because it's a negative group of people that you're working with, or that it's a state testing year, and so there's a lot of pressure on you. Try a different class, try a different area, or try to spread yourself a little differently so that you might rediscover some joy. Because sometimes when things are new, we have an opportunity to feel challenged differently. We have an opportunity to see things from a different angle, and so I think change is good. So I would say try maybe making a change within your school or even within your school district. Maybe there's multiple schools. Go to a different school, meet some new people, get some new vibes, teach something new. I think that would be awesome. The other thing that I tell people all the time, and this is whether it's in education or not, focus on what you can control. There are so many things out of our control. My husband came home a couple of years ago and he said, a guy at work really made so much sense today. He told me that we worry so much. And he said, but most of the things that we worry about are things that we cannot control. And he said, so the gentleman said to him, the things that you cannot control, you have zero control. Like whether we went to war in Ukraine, we had zero control on that. Why should we worry to the level that it's stealing our joy and it's causing us stress? Then there are things that we do have some control over, some control. So state testing, we don't have control that it's there, but we do have some control that we could advocate for less state testing. So we could put some worry in that basket and say, I'm going to devote so much time and energy to that. And then the third thing is things that we have basically full control over. And that's your attitude. It's your gratitude of how you show up every day. It's if you really don't like your work, finding a different place to be. And hopefully that's not out of education, but maybe it's a different part of education. But you've got to be real with yourself. So focus on what you can control. That's where the bulk of your worry and focus should be. Advocate for change, obviously. Join some local education communities. Make sure that you're communicating with the stakeholders so that they know what needs to change in order for things to get better. Developing a strong PLC and a PLN. If you don't know what the difference between those two are, the professional learning community is usually within your school or school district. Your professional learning network is kind of like what we're doing here with Twitter and Instagram. It's developing a group of people. I love my PLN because I can reach out to any one of them for different information that I may not have someone at school that has that information, and they get right back to me. And we've become fast and furious friends over the years. In fact, I'm going to visit one of my friends that I just know from Twitter and going to conferences, but we're going to go visit and hang out in September. So developing that PLN, they help strengthen you. They help support you. They also make your work a lot lighter because you're teaching the same thing as somebody else. They may share resources for you, and I have found that to be the case with most teachers. And then I would say lean on your colleagues for support and create the culture that you want. Create your culture is not created by your administrators. I know that everybody believes that they are the primary bearers of the culture. responsibility, but it is also incumbent upon every educator in the building to help support a culture. So if it's a really negative narrative from the administrators within your collective group of teachers, you have voices. You have a liaison that can talk to other administrators about the negative culture. You have the ability to spread sunshine through the school yourselves. You have the ability to support one another so that you can control what you can control and you can support one another that way. So lean on your colleagues for support. And then also just remember why we got into education.
Well, Michele, thank you so much. Honestly, it's been a really incredible session, and I know that what you wanted to leave, because we have about maybe 5 minutes at a stretch because we're about to go over, and unfortunately there are other sessions which are about to take place. But I do not want to let that detract from all of the amazing things that you just said. Like, I think that for me, one of the things that stood out the most is this idea of being able to create a culture and influence that culture, because focusing on the things that you can control, like you said, quite often, if you're a teacher and you're in a position where things aren't going very well, it's easy to look on the outside and look at what's happening on social media and look at what you're reading in the news and look at what's happening with your colleagues and your peers and feel very overwhelmed by things and think that there's no way out and there's no way to advocate for this. Like, I'm just in this situation and that's it. But I think that minimizing the situation a little bit and focusing on those things that you can control to make your life better as an educator, to make your job better, and to make your workplace better, I think is really important. So I really love that so much. And just lastly, I know that you wanted to mention refinding your why.
Yeah.
The reason
so
why you got
I'll
into this in
close
the
with
first
that,
place.
and then if we have any questions, or I love the chat. It's going, and thank you so much for having me today. I'm really happy to be here and here to support and elevate how incredible educators are. But yesterday I did a session for something different, and I asked the people in the chat to put their why. We talked about their legacy and what their why is. Why do they get up every day? And for me, I have multiple whys. Obviously, being a mom and being a grandmother of 4, those are my whys. And my husband, I love to travel. That's part of my why. But if you ask me for my professional why, it's education, and it's to support educators. And I love that, and I do it passionately. Nobody puts a gun to my head and says you have to write an article. I want to do it, right? So that's my why. So rediscovering your why, or reclaiming your why from when you first started. If you went into education because you thought it was an easy gig and you had summers off, well, it probably is not the why we were looking for. But almost all educators went in because they want to be difference makers. They want to be people who impact other people in positive ways. And so thinking about that, I want you to lead with this. If that's why you got into it, your work isn't done yet. Unless you're at that tail end of your career where you're like, no, I have actually, impacted 3,000 students. If you're early in your career, your work isn't done yet. You have so many more years and so many more opportunities to really impact other people and your colleagues and your students. So remember what your why is and recommit yourself to that. All of the other stuff is peripheral, and I get it. It's tough. It's tough that you're being mandated for all these things. But if you put that why at the center of what you do every day, and you make your students your why, and you look at them and you fill their needs, well, all the other things generally fall into place. And whether or not they all pass the standardized test, I mean, I know we put a lot of pressure on that, and some people do get moved from classroom because of that. But lo and behold, most of the time the machine keeps churning. But what you do every day to impact young minds and how you develop them as being good citizens and good humanitarians, well, there are no words for that. So keep on doing what you're doing. Remember what your why is. Recommit to your why. If you've really lost it, where you just can't find any joy in education any longer, well, I would say then it's time for you to go. But most of the people are still hanging in there because they believe in the good that they are doing. And help is coming. Hang on. Help is coming. I promise you.
Wow, Michelle, thank you so much. I feel like the government should hire you to try and just give speeches and reinvigorate the educators' love for their profession and it must be very, very comforting as an educator to hear those words, and you can hear more of them obviously in the book that you've written, which
Yes.
we'll be sharing
And
a
you
link
can
to your
always
website.
reach out to me for presentations, virtual presentations across the world. I'm not one of those that are looking to make $1 million doing this, but I love to share the word. So if you're interested, all my contact information is on firedupteachership.com.
No, you can tell, honestly. Thank you so much for bringing your passion and your expertise and your words to help shine a light on this. And I feel like when I came into this session, I was sort of expecting a bit of doom and gloom, and that's probably the catastrophic side of my brain going. But I think that me, like many other people in the chat, are probably leaving this feeling a little bit more hopeful for what's to come. And I really do hope that the things that you do and the things that you're working on can be a catalyst for change for many years to come, and that we can turn this thing around. Honestly, Michele, thank you so much, and thank you to our amazing community who have joined us today. I hope that you enjoyed this session, and please share all of your thoughts and your ideas and even any further questions that you might have on Twitter, any feedback on the session, because we are running a competition. We're giving away lots of swag, we're giving away some iPads, and we're also giving away a grand prize of a trip to ISTE 2023, all expenses paid, which is phenomenal. So, share all of your thoughts on Twitter. There will be a certificate available for this session. We will be sharing that in the chat, just now. Thank you all so much.
And
I wish that we had another half hour.
I would love to, anybody who's attending today, I would love to give out award like 4 random book winners. So if you, if you connect with me on Twitter at Hill M. Rispo, and also just tag in Wakelet and talk about the session in any way, then I will select 4 different people and I'll DM you for information on how to receive your book.
Oh, incredible. That's very, very generous of you. Thank you so much, Michele. I really, really appreciate you taking the time today to share this with us. And like I said, good luck in the mission. It's a very, very honorable one. And I think that you've won a lot of new fans today. And hopefully your thoughts and ideas can continue, like I said, for many years to come. Thank you all so much.
I'd love to connect. Thank you. Everybody have a great one.
Thanks, everybody. Bye-bye.